The Operator Log, Episode 11, What We've Learned. Engineering for Liquidity, Why Autonomous Companies Exit Better. Last week we closed the first arc. 10 episodes establishing the architectural foundation, what autonomous means, how agentic architecture produces it, what the coordination tax costs when you have not built it, why market selection replaces experimentation, why legacy liability traps the incumbent, why the studio model compounds, why building in public is pre-acquisition documentation, how autonomous systems fail safely, and what the human role looks like when the architecture is working. That is the model. This episode opens the second arc. The question changes from how we build to what we build toward. And what we build toward from the first architectural decision is exit. Arco does not build companies to be managed. It builds them to be acquired. The structural reason is precise. Most acquisitions fail not because of a strategic miscalculation, but because of what happens after close. The friction of integrating people, culture, institutional knowledge held in individual heads, and workflows built around human coordination. Arco designs that problem out before the first line of code is written. Two new terms enter this episode. Keyman risk is the dependence of a business's value on the continued presence of specific individuals, founders, senior engineers, relationship holders, whose departure would materially impair the business. Turnkey margin is what Arco builds instead, an autonomous business whose logic resides in the architecture, not in the people running it, and which an acquirer can integrate as a technical operation rather than a cultural negotiation. This is the operator log. The M&A failure rate is one of the most consistently documented findings in business research. Roger L. Martin, writing in Harvard Business Review, puts the figure at between 70 and 90% of acquisitions failing to meet their intended value. Not occasionally, consistently. Across industries, across deal sizes, across both strategic and financial acquirers. The primary cause is not strategic miscalculation. It is post-merger integration friction, the process of merging two organizations after close, which proves consistently more expensive, slower, and damaging to the acquired company's value than the due diligence process anticipated. The due diligence can estimate financial exposure. It cannot eliminate the human variable. And the human variable is where acquisition value goes to die. Keyman risk is the most acute expression of that variable. In a traditional startup, the value of the business is distributed unevenly across the people who built it. The founder holds the strategic vision and the key relationships. The senior engineers hold the architectural knowledge of systems that were never fully documented. The account managers hold the institutional knowledge of client relationships that live in their heads rather than in a CRM. These individuals are the business in a way that is not transferable through an acquisition agreement. They can leave. And the research published in MIT Sloan Management Review shows they do. Roughly 50% of acquired senior managers leave within the first year of an acquisition and 75% within 3 years. Each departure takes with it a portion of the value the acquirer paid for. The mechanism that produced this attrition is not mysterious. Acquisition changes the incentive structure for key individuals. The equity has been liquidated, the autonomy is reduced, the culture has shifted. In a human-centric business, the people who remain after close are often not the people whose presence made the business valuable in the first place. The acquirer inherits a different organization from the one they evaluated. The coordination tax that defined the target company's operating cost does not disappear at acquisition. It multiplies. The acquired company's coordination overhead must now be aligned with the acquiring company's coordination overhead. Two different sets of human workflows, approval chains, reporting structures, and institutional knowledge now required to operate as a single entity. The integration process is the coordination tax of two organizations being paid simultaneously, by both sides for the duration of the integration program. Most acquisitions underestimate this cost and almost none eliminate it. They carry it for years after close, watching the margin they purchased degrade as the integration drags on. For a private equity buyer, this is the core structural risk. The business they modeled at a specific margin multiple is now running at a lower margin because the integration overhead was not in the model. For a strategic buyer, it is the realization that the operational efficiency they acquired is degrading because the people who produced it are leaving and the institutional knowledge is not transferable at the speed the integration requires. In both cases, the same root cause, the value was in the people, and people are not transferable at the point of acquisition the way a technical system is. When an acquirer purchases an Arco business, they are buying a different category of asset, not a network of human dependencies, a system. The value is held in the agentic architecture, the documented, deterministic, transferable logic that drives the revenue loop. The stewards who govern it are operators, not irreplaceable founders. Their role is explicitly defined, their decision-making is logged at every step, and the architecture they govern is held in code rather than in their heads. An acquirer's own operator can assume the steward role with access to the operational documentation and a defined set of architectural parameters. There is no 6-month knowledge transfer program. There is no dependency on the founding team staying through transition. The business logic is in the architecture. The steward is interchangeable. The system continues. This is turnkey margin, an autonomous business whose operational logic resides in the architecture rather than in the people running it, and which an acquirer can integrate as a technical operation rather than a cultural negotiation. The unit of labor is compute, not people. There is no culture to merge because there is no culture to disrupt. The acquirer takes ownership of a system that already knows how to run. The integration mechanism is the machine-readable interface established in episode 9 as the schema-validated layer at every system integration point. In an acquisition context, the MRI is the technical handshake that allows an acquirer to merge the business logic into their own stack without requiring the human translators at each seam. Every integration point has a documented schema. Every data contract is explicit and validated. A technical team can integrate an Arco business's operational logic into the acquiring company's infrastructure the way they would integrate a well-documented API, not the way they would onboard a new division of 50 people with different workflows and different tools. The deterministic failure architecture, established in episode 9, serves a second purpose at acquisition. It makes the business auditable before the offer is made. Every agentic decision and handoff is logged with full context, the specific input data, the logic gate triggered, the confidence score, the output. An acquirer can replay the business's operations and verify that every action was within defined governance parameters. This is not a trust exercise. It is a verification exercise. The same architectural discipline that makes failure recoverable in production makes the business legible at acquisition. The acquirer does not evaluate a black box. They evaluate a documented system with a transparent operational history. The Arco log, established in episode 8 as pre-acquisition documentation, does this work before due diligence begins. Every architectural decision published in the log, every failure mode documented, every operational finding recorded, all of it is available to a prospective acquirer before they make an offer. The informational asymmetry that drives risk premiums in traditional acquisition does not exist for an Arco business. The documentation is public. The logic is auditable. The value is structural. Arco's internal target is a 70% reduction in post-merger integration timelines compared to equivalent human-centric service business acquisitions. That figure is our own benchmark, not an industry average. It reflects the architectural consequence of having no cultural negotiation, no knowledge transfer program, no talent retention dependency, and no coordination overhead alignment at the point of integration. What remains is technical synchronization, and technical synchronization with documented schemas and deterministic logic is a manageable and time-bounded engineering task. Two categories of acquirer are structurally suited to Arco businesses for different reasons. The strategic acquirer is a larger operator who wants Arco's operational efficiency deployed at their existing scale. They have the distribution, the customer relationships, the brand, but their operational cost structure is human-centric, and the coordination tax they pay is embedded deeply enough in the organization that they cannot remove it from within. They acquire an Arco business not to gain a new product, but to gain a different operational architecture, one that delivers the same output at a fraction of their current cost per unit. The machine-readable interface allows them to deploy that architecture into their existing stack as a technical integration, not a cultural merger. The agentic core they acquire has already been stress-tested in a live market. The failure modes are documented. The stewardship protocols are transferable. They are buying operational intelligence that would take them years to build, and they are buying it at a point where the integration friction is near zero. The financial acquirer, private equity in most cases, is looking for a specific asset profile, high margin, predictable cash flow, low overhead, and a revenue to headcount ratio that the portfolio's other assets cannot match. The 10-to-1 revenue to headcount advantage that the stewardship model produces is not an operational curiosity to a private equity buyer. It is a financial fact that changes the multiple at which the business is valued. A business that generates the same revenue as a human-centric equivalent with 1/10 of the headcount has a structurally lower operating cost, a structurally higher margin, and a structurally lower risk profile, because the primary driver of post-acquisition value destruction in human-centric businesses, talent attrition, does not apply when the unit of labor is compute rather than people. For both acquirer types, the primary driver of acquisition premium, risk, is substantially lower for an autonomous business than for a human-centric equivalent of similar revenue. Keyman. Risk is designed out. Coordination tax does not multiply at acquisition. Post-merger integration is a technical synchronization, not an organizational negotiation. The risk premium that buyers attach to these uncertainties in traditional acquisitions simply does not exist. And when risk falls, multiples rise. The mirror image of this argument is a legacy liability from episode 6. The incumbent that cannot be acquired cleanly is burdened by precisely the conditions Arco eliminates: the value held in people who will not stay, the workflows built around human coordination that cannot be transferred at acquisition speed, the institutional knowledge that lives in individuals rather than in systems, the coordination tax that multiplies when two human-centric organizations attempt to merge. Incumbents are structurally difficult to acquire, not because they are not valuable, but because the architecture that produced their value cannot be separated from the people who built it. Arco builds the structural alternative, a business whose value is explicitly and deliberately held in architecture rather than in people, precisely so that it can be transferred. The consequence of all of this is the episode's central claim: liquidity is an engineering requirement, not an exit strategy, not something retrofitted at the point a buyer appears. Every architectural decision made across the 10 episodes of the first arc was simultaneously a decision about what the business would be worth at exit and how easily it could be transferred. The clean sheet design that avoids the rebuild tax, the machine-readable interfaces that allow technical integration, the deterministic failure protocols that make the system auditable, the Arco log that eliminates informational asymmetry before due diligence begins, the stewardship model that makes the human role transferable. None of these were exit features added at the end. They were engineering decisions made at the beginning, because Arco does not build companies to be managed. It builds them to be acquired. Why are autonomous businesses structurally superior acquisition targets? Autonomous businesses eliminate the two primary causes of M&A failure, key man risk, and post-merger integration friction, because the business logic resides in the agentic architecture rather than in the people operating it. An acquirer takes ownership of a transferable, documented, deterministic system. Machine-readable interfaces allow business logic to merge into an acquirer's stack as a technical synchronization rather than a cultural negotiation. Deterministic failure protocols make the operational history auditable before due diligence begins. Arco's internal target is a 70% reduction in post-merger integration timelines versus equivalent human-centric service businesses. The result is a turnkey margin, a plug-and-play autonomous asset with a 10-to-1, revenue to head count advantage, no key man risk, and no coordination tax at close. Here is the verdict. The legacy liability that makes incumbents structurally unacquirable is the mirror image of what makes an Arco business structurally attractive. One side has accumulated decades of human-centric complexity that cannot be transferred, value held in people who live, workflows built around the coordination overhead that multiplies at integration, institutional knowledge that lives in individuals rather than in systems. The other side has built a business whose logic can be handed over in a technical handshake. When a private equity firm or strategic acquirer evaluates an Arco business, they are not being asked to trust a vision or a team. They are being asked to evaluate a documented system with a transparent operational history, a measured MTTI, a known and low operational drag ratio, a stewardship model with explicit transition protocols, and a public log that covers the system's architectural decisions, failure modes, and operational findings over time. The informational asymmetry that drives risk premiums in traditional acquisitions does not exist. And when informational asymmetry falls, value rises. Every architectural decision documented across the first 10 episodes was simultaneously a decision about exit. The design choices that produce architectural certainty also produce acquirability. The deterministic failure protocols that make the system recoverable also make it auditable. The stewardship model that makes the business operable with minimal headcount also makes the transition manageable at close. Liquidity is not something Arco retrofits at the point a buyer appears. It is something we engineer before the first line of code is written. The full written version of this argument is memo number 11, Engineering for Liquidity, on the blog at arcoventure.studio. Every term introduced across this arc is defined precisely in the Arco lexicon at arcoventure.studio/lexicon. Arco does not sell potential. We sell predictability. Next week, the Arco flywheel, how operational intelligence compounds across a portfolio, and why each business in the studio makes every subsequent business more valuable. We do not just build companies to scale, we build them to be sold. This has been episode 11 of the Operator Log.